to, we'll do it to our distribution list so that people who were unable to attend tonight can learn what was talked about here. And I am piggybacking on Eleanor's meeting. So I will turn it over to Eleanor, and thank you everyone for being here. Hello to 6th Ward resident Ann Rainey. Nice to see you. And Eleanor, take it away.
Okay, yeah, well, welcome everyone to this important discussion about our draft comprehensive plan and zoning code. I think we were first going to ask Matt Rogers, who I think I saw somewhere, the chair of the Land Use Commission, to talk to us just briefly about the timeline as he sees it from the Land Use Commission perspective. So Matt, are you?
I'm here.
Oh, there, good. Oh yeah, there you are. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you to Alderman Suffredin and Ravel for inviting me to come. Make a few brief comments about the comp plan and sort of the process that we're moving through it with. As many of you probably know, if you've been watching the news or were at meeting, I see some names from last week's meeting. We on the Land Use Commission decided to put a temporary pause on the discussion of the zoning ordinance and focus our attention on the comprehensive general plan. We will be doing that beginning on January 8th, so after the holidays, so no one has to worry about what's going on with the comp plan and the zoning ordinance during the holidays. The schedule that we have moving forward will be finalized tomorrow. I'm meeting with staff in order to line up sort of what our meeting schedule will be moving forward. We have the comp plan, obviously, we have the zoning ordinance, but we also have some cases that are the types of things that we typically hear for plan developments that are also in the pipeline. So it's figuring out how all of that works together. And the reason that I kind of wanted to come tonight was just to encourage everyone to stay engaged, to send in your comments to the city through either the Envision Evanston 2024 website or through staff. And we do read through those comments. We do get a lot of them. And that's the best way to make your points and your opinions known. When you come to speak at a land use commission, unfortunately, we have to limit time. So when you have a longer, more involved discussion that you want to have or a point you want to make, it's best to do that in either an email or through the city's website and give us the input that you feel we need in order to move forward with this decision. So really that's kind of what I'm here to do, is encourage you to stay engaged. I know a number of you are reaching out to your alderpersons on council and also through other means, but do stay engaged, and hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we'll get things finalized as to what our schedule is going to be moving forward and getting everybody's input put in to this new plan as we move forward. Unfortunately, I really can't take a lot of questions about the specific plan since it is before the Land Use Commission, but I'm going to just kind of hang around and listen. So this is another chance for me to sort of hear the input from people in the public about what they're seeing in the comp plan. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Councilmember Ravel.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt, and thank you to you and the Land Use Commission for the many, many hours that you've already begun to spend on this important issue. I really appreciate the long hours that you devoting to this topic. We all really want to get it right, and it's going to take a lot of hard work before it's there. So I see we have several staff here, and I'm not exactly sure what they have planned. We have Sarah Flax, our Community Development Director. Is that Steve Ruger, our Deputy City Manager, Allison Leipziger, who's a Policy Coordinator, and Megan Jones, who is our Land Use and Planning Coordinator.
Neighborhood and Land Use Planner.
There we go. Okay, so Tom and I have been sending staff questions that you all have been submitting to us so that they could sort of begin a presentation, at least addressing some of the key issues that you all have been sending to us. So Allison, should I turn it over to you? Who's
Tell Councilmember Ravel, you can turn it over to me. Hi, Steve Ruger.
Oh, okay, there we
I know
go.
it says Sarah Flax, but we're tag teaming in a conference room here at
And the
uh,
big screen didn't work.
yeah, but
Sorry.
we're here, happy to be with y'all. So we do have the list of questions, and staff has gone through and did our best to think through them and put some answers together. So what I think we'll do is okay. I think we have a presentation first that Megan's going to provide, and then we will segue from there into the specific questions we received and do our best to answer those for you. So I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Megan, and if you want to go through your presentation, please.
Yes, thank you. Again, my name is Megan Jones. I'm a neighborhood and land use planner with the city of Evanston. I have a quick presentation that'll just go through just kind of where we are in a very high level overview of what has been released so far. So I will share my screen. All right, is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. So, as you all are aware, we have been going through this Envision Evanston process where we have been getting community feedback and really trying to take a look at our existing code and what we have so far, what inconsistencies, what things we need to update, looking at some of the goals we might need to update and really create 2 new documents, which would be the zoning code and our comprehensive plan. So we've gone through pretty much all of these phases. We are in the midst of phase 5 now, which is the legislative process. So we did the first few phases, which was a lot of community engagement. We've had about 80 different opportunities, be they community meetings, ward meetings, pop-up events, conversations with some stakeholders to get a better idea of where we currently are, what the needs might be, and what changes we might need to make in order to really kind of hone in and reach some of the higher level goals. So speaking of those goals, from the community engagement that we've done, we came up with the 7 goals that are listed here, including promoting community health and well-being, boosting the local economic resilience and growth, championing environmental sustainability and climate action, expanding and enhancing transportation choices, diversifying our housing options for all income levels, ensuring equitable access to opportunities and resources, and supporting and celebrating the arts, culture, and creative expression that we have in Evanston. And considering the engagement that we did, the goals that were created, and an actual event that occurred in a visioning session, we came up with the following vision statement. In 2045, Evanston is a vibrant, resilient, and welcoming community for all. Evanston celebrates its diversity through our arts, culture, history, and neighborhoods, and the steady growth in our local circular economy cultivates opportunities close to home while achieving ambitious and necessary climate action. Our abundant access to parks and open spaces promotes well-being, and extensive housing options make living in Evanston safe and attainable. Evanston's neighborhoods are connected through a robust network of transit, bike, and pedestrian options, and we achieve this vision through proactive planning, community collaboration, and bold action. So putting all this into an actual comprehensive plan, we have 9 chapters that go through really some of the typical things that you see in a comprehensive plan. The first chapter, again, speaks to the vision that I just read and is really more of an aspirational aspect in talking about what we aim to be, including some of the things I listed: being vibrant, resilient, inclusive, prioritizing sustainability and economic diversity, and a strong sense of community. We also want to be leaders in environmental initiatives and really addressing climate action changes and its impacts that have been occurring. We also want to improve connectivity and accessibility in Evanston. So that's enhancing transportation networks and ensuring that we have safe and affordable access to the amenities within Evanston, and having a diverse housing option, or having diverse housing options that will help to prevent displacement. Our future land use strategy chapter, this speaks more to the centers and corridors framework that we're using to help to define how we change the zoning code. So this really focuses on developing more mixed use centers, some of them in areas that are already existing, and adding more development to existing corridors where there's some existing amenities and infrastructure. And this would make for more efficient land use, integrate existing transportation and cultural preservation. We also want to do something that's more proactive with regards to our planning. So this chapter creates the future land use map, which lends itself to the zoning districts that I will get into shortly. And that'll all help to guide development, balancing environmental, economic, and community needs. And it also deals with policy integration. So all the land use policies that we will have to aim to promote health, sustainability, and equitable access to housing, recreation, and business opportunities. So this is the future land use map that I just mentioned. It creates several different areas. So low impact residential, moderate size residential, urban living, business districts, downtown, urban mixed use, campus district, neighborhood pocket, creation and innovation, and open space. So chapter 3 deals a lot more with transportation. This will prioritize public transit, active transportation, so alternative ways to get here and there, walking, biking, other micro-mobility options, as well as infrastructure upgrades to help us to reduce dependency on vehicles and reduce emissions. We also really want to concentrate on safety and accessibility for these items. So invest in pedestrian and biking networks and improve the safety and inclusivity for all ages and abilities. As mentioned, we do want to get towards carbon neutrality goals. So this would be encouraging electric vehicle adoption, transit decarbonization, and having a robust parking management reform to help us to align with our sustainability objectives. Chapter 4 deals with parks and open space. So for this, we want to have inclusive access, ensuring that Evansonians have equitable access to our parks and open spaces, and better integrating them into neighborhoods and help to promote health and well-being. This also touches on climate adaptation. So incorporating more green infrastructure and biodiverse landscapes. And this will help us to manage stormwater, reduce urban heat islands, and enhance ecosystem services. So also be more community engagement. So fostering stewardship and participation in park planning. And this will help to ensure that spaces meet the diverse needs of the community, and celebrate Evanston's natural assets. Chapter 5 concentrates specifically on the environment. You probably noticed that a lot of the sustainability and environment things are really kind of woven out throughout the plan. This chapter deals solely on this. So again, we do want to be leaders in sustainability. So committing to carbon neutrality by 2050, emphasizing renewable energy, green infrastructure, and climate resilience in the planning that we do. We want to have resource conservation. So protecting our natural resources, such as the lakefront and biodiversity, through some more sustainable land management practices. We also want to reduce our waste. And this would be enhancing recycling, composting, and deconstruction practices to help promote a circular economy and reduce our landfill dependence. Chapter 6 deals with economic development, and we really want to have a local economy focus here. And that's supporting small, minority-owned, and women-owned businesses. And this will be done through financial incentives and a more streamlined development process. This is something that we have heard a lot. Having more job creation. So fostering innovation districts and collaboration with some of our larger institutions to help provide job opportunities for people close to home. And we also want to concentrate on revitalizing the downtown. So that's investing in downtown and business districts to help to balance the retail, housing, and public spaces and spurring more economic vitality. Housing chapter. So as mentioned, we want to have diverse housing option. So this is increasing our housing supply, having diverse types and sizes to meet the varying community needs. We also want to have displacement prevention. This is something that we've been hearing. Evanston is expensive, or people cannot find the types of homes that they're looking for. We want to implement policies to protect residents from displacement. We also want to have sustainable housing. So this will be promoting energy efficiency and resilient housing that actually helps to align with our environmental goals and reduces health hazards. Chapter 8 is more placemaking, arts, and culture. This is really celebrating the arts and culture that we have here in Evanston. We want to preserve Evanston's history, architecture, and the arts through public spaces and community-driven public art. We want to have inclusive events and support our diverse cultural expressions and events, and that will help to strengthen community bonds and inclusivity. We want to activate more public spaces. So that would be designing accessible, engaging spaces that will help to encourage public interaction and reflect Evanston's identity. And finally, chapter 9 is dealing with preservation. So this would be heritage protection, specifically safeguarding historic buildings and neighborhoods to maintain our architectural and cultural legacy. Concentrating more on adaptive reuse, and that would be promoting the rehabilitation and repurposing of existing structures to integrate modern uses while preserving the actual character of those buildings. And they have some community involvement. And this would be encouraging the community participation in preservation efforts, and that would help to balance growth with cultural significance. So going back to the future land use map, this using the corridors and centers framework, this transfers over to the proposed zoning districts, which is the map that is on the right. So we have gone from 34 districts currently to a proposed 17 districts. So really streamlining the number of districts that we have, trying to clarify really what can be used and what's permitted within these districts, hoping to have more efficient processes for things that can occur in these districts. And this speaks to what the proposed districts are. So you've got residential, mixed use, downtown, university, and our specialized districts. And those specialized districts include institutional campus. So areas that have a larger land use like ETHS and our hospitals, creation and innovation, which speaks to what are currently more of our industrial or like mixed use manufacturing areas, and then open space, pretty self-explanatory, is open space and parks that exist within Evanston. So that's my very quick high-level overview of everything. Now we will get into answering the questions that were sent in to council members Revelle and Suffredin. And then we really want to keep in mind if we have some additional questions, when you're sharing your feedback, talk about what's great, what shouldn't change, what needs to be adapted, and then what's missing. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah and Steve. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Megan. And oh, I noticed our camera's stopped. Let me fix that. There we are. Okay, thank you, Megan, for the presentation. We are seeing the comments in the chat. So council members Ravel and Suffredin had put out a request for comments in advance of the meeting, and we received several. So we have summarized those comments and are prepared to answer those tonight. But I do want to encourage people who have comments, concerns, anything, please forward those to our Land Use Commission for their consideration as they go through the public process of vetting this document, the comprehensive plan and the zoning code, so that they're aware of your concerns. So what I will do is read the questions we received. They may not match up verbatim with what you submitted. We tried to summarize as much as we could, a lot of redundant questions. But then Sarah's going to be so kind as to help answer as best we can tonight. So the first question is, the mayor's introduction to the comprehensive plan states that the plan outlines the community's shared values and vision, yet the plan only points to just 3,000 residents participating in the visioning process. How do we know that this truly represents the community's values and vision? And I'll pass it over to Sarah for that.
So we did a lot of outreach in that first phase and got many people from all parts of Evanston involved, about 3,000 total. That clearly is a small portion of our total population, but for engagements of this type, that's like a 3% of our population, and a common level of engagement in these types of activities in other cities is more in the 1 to 2% level. So we did get a lot of input from many different people and worked through this whole process to come to the visioning activity and getting the vision and the goals. We're not saying that they represent everyone's perspective, and that's one of the reasons we're coming back to the community and all these meetings to hear more from you and get your input to inform the development of the plan. This was always proposed as an iterative process. We need to hear from you and then bring things back to you and hear from you again. So that's what we're doing tonight.
Okay. All right. The next question has to do with the relationship of the proposed plan and zoning code to our preservation ordinance. So specifically, what role will the Preservation Commission play in the implementation of the new zoning code? How will the balance between preservation and more housing be achieved?
Well, the zoning ordinance and the preservation ordinance really operate in their own separate spheres. The Preservation Commission will continue to review all the anything that's being done on a landmark property or in the landmark districts as appropriate, and provide certificates of occupancy and all that sort of stuff. So there's really no difference in the role of the Preservation Commission. In fact, it's very important that we continue to involve and engage them. And we're actually looking at some possible additional activities that are preservation related, including conservation districts, which can be used in different communities for different purposes, more focused on neighborhoods as a whole and not so much on specific architecturally significant buildings, but on the significance of a neighborhood in its history. So it really, as I say, it will continue, the preservation role continues as it is.
One of the questions that came up specific to preservation in the Land Use Commission's last meeting is, does this, our historic preservation districts, does this do anything to change them? And absolutely not. Those remain in place as established. Those are totally separate processes prescribed by totally separate laws. So none of those are changed by the zoning. And to Sarah's point, historic preservation, landmarking, all of that stuff kind of supersedes some of the things that we would put or that the zoning code may impact. So we'll always take that into consideration as we move forward. So next question is timeline for conversion of single family homes to multifamily residents. So specifically regarding the proposed increased density for R1 and R2 zones, what rate of conversion from single family homes to multifamily residents does the city expect by year to year until 2045?
Wow, that's not something we'll even try to predict.
Yeah.
There are a ton of factors that affect this, what will happen and how fast it'll happen. But we don't expect radical change in the near future. And there are a lot of reasons for that. First of all, that kind of change necessitates property to being available for redevelopment or any change from what it is. And a lot of our R1 and 2 properties are owner occupied. And so our owners have a great deal of control over their own property. They don't have to sell. But the other thing is that we're looking at is just experience with when we've made pretty major code changes. In 2021, we made really pretty extreme, in many communities' eyes, changes to allow accessory dwelling units on any residential property in the city subject to lot coverage and impermeable surface. And we said they could have detached, attached, internal, build out, all of those things were possible. We haven't had that many. I don't have the exact number in my head, but I think it's something like 36. It's in that range. Since that ordinance went into effect. And we're also, when we're looking at other cities that have made changes to their zoning, including not having, traditional single family zoning like Minneapolis and others, they're not seeing radical change. We don't intend this to be radical change, but it's designed to allow change over a period of 20 years that can accommodate the changing needs and lifestyles of the people of Evanston.
Okay, the next question is on housing ownership. So in the US, single family homes are approximately 7 times more often owner occupied than our multi-unit residential housing. What is Evanston's current level of owner occupied versus investor owned housing for both housing types? And what is the projected level of owner occupied dwellings in the R1 and R2 zones as single family homes are converted to multifamily dwellings?
Okay. Well, I can give you some statistics here. And this is the 2022 American Community Survey, which is that annual survey. But this is the 5-year estimates. So it's from 5 different years, then they average it. 89% of single unit homes in Evanston are owner occupied, and about 37% of 2 to 4 unit buildings in Evanston are owner occupied. So we have really, really strong owner occupancy. But it's not our goal to define how much of our housing should be converted from single unit homes to multi-unit homes or owner occupied versus rental, because many of those things are based on the needs and desires of the people living in our community. We're seeing some changes in what people are looking for. There's a real growth in demand for rental housing, and it's generally in 2 groups, younger adults and older adults, not exclusive, but very definitely there. And it is not just people who are lower income and can't afford to buy. People are choosing to rent because it suits their lifestyle and they want the flexibility to be able to move or whatever. There are also changes in what kind of housing people want. We hear more from younger people that they're not particularly interested in worrying about, yards and home maintenance. And I think that's part of what's driving it. Really what we're trying to do, and the goal of the plan and the zoning changes, is to remove restrictions that limit housing supply and perpetuate segregation for residents who rent and for residents who want to own a home in any part of Evanston. We are an economically diverse city, but we're not economically integrated in all neighborhoods. And our zoning is a function of that, continues to support that. So really what we're trying to do here is increase housing supply and housing choice for the people who need it. And developers are going to respond to the needs of the market. They don't just go out and build things if they're not seeing the need for it.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for that. Next question has to do with tailoring the zoning map. Why do the plan and zoning code propose a blanket change to the current R1 zoning rather than studying each neighborhood and deciding what changes, if any, would be appropriate there?
Well, we're changing all the zoning. As Megan said, we have 34 different districts. And we're reducing them to 17. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Megan talked about some of them, you know, making it less confusing and easier to understand what you can do on your properties, and simplifying approvals, and the whole process of building something or changing something. But there are some other interesting statistics, excuse me. A remarkable portion of the parcels in our R1 and R2 zoning are not compliant with the current, minimum lot sizes and other, requirements of our zoning. So, for example, R1, we have 6,930 R1 parcels in our R1 zoning, and 4,180 actually comply with the minimum lot size. That's 60%. Excuse me, I got the wrong one. It's 4,020. That's 58% that, no, I'm sorry. I was right. 60% are conforming. So 58% would have an additional process, because if they were to go, to example, to get 4 units, they would have to get variances from our land use commission. So they would have to go through one of those complicated processes. So in R2, we have about 4,250 parcels. And in that, 2,432 are conforming. So that's about 57%. So our current zoning doesn't reflect the built environment. And what we're trying to do with the zoning is make more of the properties conforming in the zoning district that they will now be in, so that it makes it easier for them to know what they can do with their property and be able to do it with the least amount of delay and pain of getting there. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We do have several more questions. So thanks for your patience as we go through these. Hopefully we'll answer some of the concerns. Is there a procedure to present evidence for a reconsideration of the zoning assigned to a particular property in the new map?
Well, really important is to tell us about your concerns before everything's finalized, because then there may not be a need to do so much of that. And that really, I'm not being, we're really serious. If you have specific lots or specific areas that you don't think the zoning applies to, please send those comments in, because that's important. If we know where you are concerned, where your concerns are, then we can address them. So normally you don't look at individual properties to change zoning, because that results in spot zoning, and that's kind of a no-no. You're making a change for one property. So that's really why it's important that we hear your concerns about all the properties or all the parts that where you think the zoning doesn't fit. There is a process though, to get zoning changes. And it's a map amendment. And there's a process for that. And that will still exist. But as I say, it is not a good practice to change a single lot in a zoning area, which is why it's so important that we really hear from you on the areas, general areas of that and how they're zoned.
Okay, the next question is crowding concerns. And so the specific question is, the proposed new zoning would allow a 4-unit building with a full 3 stories and 5-foot side yard setbacks to loom over the older 2.5-story home next door, resulting in less sunlight for the current homeowners. What else can be done to protect the quality of life for the neighbors of the new 4-flat?
But the actual height and bulk that is allowed in the new proposed zoning districts differs very little from the existing height and bulk of properties. And, you know, I've seen quite a number of very large single-family homes built on right next to existing 1-story and 1.5-story homes already. And somehow it hasn't, you know, I mean, that's part of the function of, you know, we have older homes and older properties that were built at different scale. And frankly, we've built a whole bunch of huge houses already. So the scale of what we're allowing to be built really is not that different. So it may sound like it's really different, but we have plenty of 2.5-story houses that are already at that same height maximum that we're allowing.
And just specific, just so I can give you guys the numbers. So a property currently zoned R1 must adhere to a 35-foot height maximum with a 5-foot interior side yard setback minimum. And a property with an R1 in the proposed zoning must also adhere to a 35-foot height maximum and a 5-foot interior side yard setback. So those stay the same.
It's the same.
Okay, so those in terms of the actual numbers, those are not changing.
Yep.
And then kind of a follow-up to that question, the next one is a similar concern for homeowners in the new R2 zone. Why is the side yard setback being reduced from a 5-foot minimum to a 3-foot minimum?
Well, that's where we get into how many of the parcels that are in this new R2 zone don't comply with the current zoning. They were actually built with 3-foot setbacks. And so they are already out of compliance with their zoning. That's one of the biggest problems when we have large lots or zoning for large lots overlaid on existing plats and existing properties. So they were already at the size, as I say, that we're changing that setback to.
Okay, the next the question has to do with environmental impacts of the increased density. Specifically, adding significant density over 20 years will entail a loss of impervious surface. How will this be reconciled with the city's 2023 stormwater master plan?
Well, that too really doesn't change from the existing process. Our stormwater management plan and current stormwater management regulations continue to apply to all properties in the city. Public Works staff has been at the table for this whole process and is aware of the proposed changes. And if needed, the city engineer can provide some additional information on any proposed changes. But that whole process stays in place because it is important to deal with stormwater runoff. We know that that is a problem. And one of the things that happens when you start building more and you have more lot coverage, is you have to have techniques to mitigate that, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, the next question is also an environmental concern. What will be the impact of the increased density on Evanston's mature tree canopy?
Well, just in June of this year, we our tree preservation ordinance went into effect, and that tree preservation ordinance will stay in effect the same way. So that includes a process that property owners must go through before they remove trees. It also makes everyone consider trees that are not being removed, but that need to be protected during construction, because that's another really important part of the tree ordinance. You know, it's not just the ones that somebody might want to remove, but we have to protect the trees that are in the environment that where construction is going on. But so we do allow for tree removal, but when people remove a tree, they have to replace that tree with additional trees or pay a fee to a fund that is used for that purpose in part throughout Evanston.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Next question is substandard R1 lot size, and specifically, what will the new zoning allow to be built on a substandard lot in the new R1 zone? For example, on a 5,000 square foot lot, where the new requirement will be 6,500 square feet.
Well, call out to the Land Use Commission. That's one of the things that they've asked us to really look at and consider, and it's an important one. Right now, those non-conforming lots could only have a single unit, a single dwelling unit, primary dwelling unit, and an ADU, which is really what they can have right now. We're considering an allowance that would allow additional dwelling units to be added to an existing structure on a substandard lot, provided that the building structure was not expanded in any way. Like a dwelling unit that would be completely within the existing building footprint. But we need to work on that more. And one of the things we'd love to hear is if you have any ideas on that, because it's a really important thing.
Okay, the next one has to do with the current rule of only allowing up to 3 unrelated individuals in a home, or individual parties in a home. So the question specifically is, studies in other university communities, Boston, NYU, and Bloomington, indicate that eliminating the 3 unrelated rule will result in increased rents. What will the city do to help families unable to keep up with higher rents and compete with groups of students for housing?
Well, I haven't seen those studies that show that rents are increasing due to that, but you know, there are definitely that we would use a different occupancy standard. It's not like we're going to do away with occupancy standards, and we already use that occupancy standard, but we only apply it right now to rental housing, because we don't frankly apply any occupancy standards to owner occupied unless we end up having problems, and that's when that kicks in. The 3 unrelated rule is discriminatory and really doesn't fit within the goals of the city, because it does, it's an exclusionary tactic. And the other thing is, people live differently. And in fact, the thing that we're seeing a great deal of is loneliness has been identified as one of the greatest health issues in this country and many others. And people form households that aren't necessarily people related by blood, marriage, or adoption, because these are people that they view as their family. In other words, they're deciding their family. It isn't based on blood, marriage, or adoption. But the property maintenance code, which has a formula that looks at number of bedrooms, size of bedrooms, to determine how many people can occupy it, in addition to an amount of square footage of common space per person, actually gives you a better method of managing occupancy than the number of how many people are related. So that's an important thing to be aware of. But that won't address some of the issues that people believe that the 3 unrelated addresses, which we sometimes call nuisance properties. And a lot of times it's younger people living together who tend to have a lot of parties. Well, one of the interesting things is a lot of the times when those nuisances arrive are the parties. It's not when they're actually just living in their dwelling unit. And there are other ways that we are, that we can improve how we can address those by looking at our nuisance premises ordinance and making some strengthening those in some ways. The other thing that people worry about is lots of people just living in a house together, and you know, that can get unruly. But one of the things, if somebody is, from a rental standpoint, if there is a form of rental housing where they're renting by the room and they're not renting standard dwelling units, other than a very large house, and they're renting it to each individual person, that's really more a like a rooming house, like the modern version of a rooming house. Or and this is where our shared housing provider license can come into effect. And we can require housing of that type to have a operating plan and all how they're going to manage their housing. That's one of the reasons that was developed, to try to deal with this type of housing issue. But I think it's really important to think about, I mean, the famous one is the Golden Girls. Right now, the Golden Girls couldn't live in an apartment together. Even if it was a 4-bedroom apartment, they'd be in violation with our ordinance. And that's the kind of restriction that we don't think we should be putting on people. The other thing is, there are times, especially when you know, what degree of blood relationship is a family? You know, we don't have a good definition of that. There isn't a definition. And families that have intergenerational households are sometimes excluded from the definition by some people in their interpretation of, is that a blood relationship, or is it a close enough blood relationship? But it affects how we allow people to live together based on who they choose to live with, I think, is the most important factor.
Okay, the next question is on affordability. How will allowing 2, 3, and 4-bedroom units in all neighborhoods improve affordability? Developers will be able to replace modest single-family homes with more expensive 4-unit condos. This would seem to be counter to one of the visions of the plan to implement policies and programs that prevent displacement.
Well, this is an issue. Displacement is an issue we're seeking to address. It certainly isn't a goal, and it isn't an acceptable outcome of this process that we would want to see. But there are ways that we are exploring to mitigate potential displacement of residents and of modest single-family homes, while still increasing housing supply and providing rental income opportunities to help residents afford to stay in their homes or age in place. Examples might be, and we're talking about this, of helping people add an accessory dwelling unit that allows them to stay in their home because they can get additional income and pay their taxes and all the things that could otherwise drive them out as housing costs increase. Another thing is, you know, we're looking at ways to expand our housing rehab programs. You may have heard of the Green Homes, Healthy Homes program. That, combined with our existing CDBG housing rehab programs, one of the things that sometimes people will sell a home when they are made an offer is if they are unable to maintain it and manage it and keep up with all the costs. So these are all things that we're looking at as strategies. and are going to be, you'll find out more of them when we complete and bring forward our housing plan that's also under development at this time.
Okay, next, roads and infrastructure. Will the city need to put in more infrastructure, example for water and sewer, in the current single-family neighborhoods to accommodate the proposed greater density? Will greater electrical capacity be needed as well?
Well, the city will continue to invest in infrastructure upgrades as we do today, and I think we're gonna see different, over a 20-year period, we're also going to see different patterns of transportation that will affect the size and scale of our roads as more people use micro-mobility options and things like that. So that'll make a difference. But ComEd and our MWRD will continue to invest in infrastructure too. You know, it's ComEd is required to be able to deliver electricity to its service area. And that's something that we have a lot of discussions with. We've had discussions with ComEd around electrification. You know, this is a constant and ongoing discussion. There are times that there are areas where there is a challenge getting electrical, the capacity that we need. But again, it's going to be gradual. And this is something that is being worked on and expanded as needed all along.
Okay, and then continue on roads and infrastructure. Many streets in current single-family neighborhoods are already heavily parked, making it difficult to drive through these streets now. How will additional cars from new multifamily housing be accommodated? In particular, how will parking for a floor flat be managed?
Okay. First of all, I want to make a point about speed. Reducing speed especially on residential streets, is something that actually increases safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and any other micro-mobility. So this is our kids going to school, all kinds of different people. It makes it makes their lives safer. So reducing speeds isn't always a bad thing. In fact, one of the things that is used to reduce speeds is narrowing streets. So drivers have to pay attention. They can't just charge down the roads. But parking, the proposed zoning eliminates parking minimums, but it does require projects to prepare a transportation management plan. Developers are going to have to estimate and what parking needs will be for whatever they're developing. And there are a lot of factors that come into that. How convenient is it? Like some of our neighborhoods are very proximate to grocery stores. Well, if you're farther away from the grocery stores, you're likely to need more vehicles, that sort of thing. But it's going to be up to them to propose a transportation, or to prepare and submit a transportation management plan with their development that will be reviewed by staff, and then they will be required to deliver on that. And it will be different based on as those many factors. The other interesting thing is Evanston already has 30% of households do not own a car. So we're seeing more and more people making a choice not to own a car. They may use car sharing and things like that, but we are seeing a reduction in people owning cars.
All right, the next question is a timeline for completion of the plan and zoning code. And the specific question is, planning professionals indicate that the typical duration for a zoning code rewrite is 2 to 3 years. What is the reasoning for expecting to accomplish this in Evanston in half the time?
Well, the city council authorized our city manager to enter into a contract with HDR in July 2023, which sought to complete the project on the timeline that we've been on. That was in what we were charged with doing. Staff is going to continue to be flexible and follow the direction of the city council if they decide to extend it or change that. But that's why we're on this schedule. I do want to make another point. One of the real challenges is we have a lot of need for change to accomplish city goals and to be able to provide for our residents and who are already here and for residents who may come to Evanston. And the longer we take, the more challenging the problem can become. So there's some benefit to trying to do things more rapidly than sometimes things have been done in the past.
Yeah, and just one more thought on that. So ultimately, the timeline is also set forth at this point by our land use commission and the city council. And so staff will certainly yield any decisions that are made, especially based on feedback we're receiving. The next question is on community feedback. Has the feedback to date been supportive or against single family zoning?
It's been both. There's support from many people and there's not support from many others. That's one of the reasons we're here hearing from you. And we are interested in looking at feedback and hearing your suggestions on what we should do differently if you're not comfortable with what's proposed. And that's how we'll ultimately work out a plan by continuing engagement and getting your input and bringing that back in revisions to the plan as appropriate.
Okay, and then just a couple of more questions that we have to answer for y'all tonight. The next one has to do with our diversity of housing. And specifically, does this plan discourage families from moving to Evanston?
No, it doesn't. Actually, we hope we can make it possible for more families to move to Evanston by providing housing that they can afford. But expanding what you can do in zoning districts like R1 and R2 to allow more units can make it possible for more people to move to Evanston. And keep in mind, there are lots of ways that more than single unit homes have been used throughout our history in Evanston and every place else to enable families to move to and afford home ownership. Owner-occupied two flats are one of the best examples of that. That's historically been a way that people can afford to become property owners. And one of the interesting things with a lot of two flats is they are also a family arrangement where you get like parents and then adult children or siblings who, you know, or an aunt and an uncle. And so these types of housing actually encourage certain kinds of families and make it possible for them to have housing that meets their lifestyles and needs.
Okay, and then the last question is about population projections. So do we have population projections from other sources in addition to CMAP?
We do not at this time. CMAP is the planning agency for the entire Chicago metropolitan area, and we haven't gone outside to seek any others. But it is just an estimate, and we have to remember that. Then we have these ones too.
So Steve and Sarah, I think if that's the end of the questions, let's go to our live audience and
Okay.
ask people to raise their hand if they have a question. And Periel, you've had a hand up for a while.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, can you hear me?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, great. I am very curious about the demographics of the people who have had community input, because it seems to me that perhaps I get the impression that the people are speaking on living arrangements that they don't exist in themselves. So are we getting community impact about multi-unit, reducing, let's say, getting rid of R1, but it's from people who live in apartments or who rent? Just because it seems to be the case that there's a lot of pushback in this meeting currently, just in the chat alone, and it makes me wonder if the people making decisions, I guess, for our ward are actually residents of this ward, or if we're getting impact, making decisions based on the perspectives of people who don't even live here. Do we have any insights as to like what types of people or what the backgrounds of the people who were interviewed or had community impact were? Are we sure it's been an even distribution?
Well, I think we'll ask Sarah about that, but I think it was just an open invitation to anyone in the community to attend these meetings and fill out the surveys and provide their information. I don't believe we have any specific demographic information. Sarah?
Well, we made great efforts to try to reach people who are comfortable coming to public meetings and making comment, and also people who are not. So we had specific outreach to through going to places in the neighborhood where people in different neighborhoods where people could it's kind of on the spot interviews where you can get input from people. And sometimes it's that their lifestyles don't allow them the leisure of coming to a meeting in the evening. Maybe they have kids and they can't leave. There are all kinds of reasons, but one of the goals of the city is to have integrated neighborhoods. And so limiting what input to only people in the areas they live doesn't really accomplish our ability to understand what people may want that they don't have based on the way our current structure and zoning is. So the input is from both people who live in the wards and people who don't live in the wards.
And to Councilmember Ravel's point, no, we are not tracking demographics of the people who are coming to our public processes.
Okay, that's good to know, because it does seem like I have a young family. I have 2 small children, and I feel like I've been hearing a lot of what people with young children want, and I don't think that's in accordance with what people that I know who also have young children, do play dates with. And I think, Sarah, you're actually 100% correct in that. If you did have these in the evenings, that's when my child is in bed, and I'd be less likely to attend. And I do worry that maybe we didn't have enough of an input and impact. And if we're, going to say that we're doing this for young families, I think it's a little, I don't know, problematic to do so if we know that we might not be reaching out to young families. But that's more of a comment than a question. I'll go ahead and let Erin go next. Thank you.
But we did.
Hold on. I just want to say to Sarah's first point, we did meetings during the day, we did meetings on the weekends, we did meetings on the evenings, we did virtual, we did in person, we did surveys, and the idea was that there are people who weren't going to be able to make those, any one of those things work for any reason. We also did events in Spanish for the same reason. Like, we kind of tried to do everything possible, and for a lot of those we did have demographics. Sorry, there's a crying kid in the background. We did try to gather demographics as much as possible. So in a situation like this, we're not asking people's demographics for this meeting, but in when we did surveys and things like that, we definitely did get demographics. And I think we asked race, ethnicity, age, and ward for every time we did gather demographic information. So it's not a perfect representation, because like I said, when you logged into this Zoom, we didn't ask you your age, your ethnicity, your race, and your ward. But for a lot of the things where we had people sign in or did surveys or things like that, we did ask those. So it's a balance of when we have it and when we don't.
Okay, and I appreciate that, and I think that's reasonable, but I'm also concerned because when I talk about demographics, I don't think most of those are relevant. I'm more interested in what percent were owners versus renters, what percent had families versus not. I think age might be relevant, but and I also think that I looked through the that 100, what is it, 104, 118 page document that you produced, and it doesn't really say the demographic breakdown of who was interviewed and how that is reflected in the different desires of the city. And I think that matters a lot when we talk about how it reflects on our zoning map changes. But again, we might be too late in the process to do anything quite about that. I hope not, but
No, I don't think so at all. And a lot of our public feedback stuff will go in the appendix at the end. That's a
okay.
great point.
Okay, Aaron, you want to go next?
Hi,
Yeah, there we
actually, it's
oh,
Sonia.
Sonia, okay, go ahead.
I had sent an email to Eleanor, who supposedly was going to forward it to you, Sarah, but you did not read my questions. So I now have a little more than one question. First of all, I live on the 2700 block of Prairie, and we are a very mixed housing. I think it's something that I enjoy because we're a neighborhood. We're a nice community. There's some 2.5 multi-units like the one I live. There's nice houses. There's townhouses. However, my block has 2 blocks right there north of Central have been given an R4 designation, which I think will change our neighborhood dramatically. As a 2.5 story, I could have 2 4 stories looming over me on either side with a 3-foot minimum setback on their side and my side. And I respectfully disagree with you, Sarah. I think if you live in a place that no longer will provide fresh, will block your sunlight, will potentially have people looming over, and I am near Ryan Field, and I do know both of my neighbors potentially are thinking of selling. So this is an extremely real possibility for me. I also question, so one of my main questions is, why is there 3-foot minimum setbacks for R2, R3, and R4 residential districts, and you're retaining the 5-foot minimum setback for the R1? It seems discriminatory to me. So that's my first question, if you want to
Okay.
start.
I can answer that. It's based on lot size, and in many cases, the lot widths are relative to the lot sizes. We have some really non-conforming lots that are kind of square, but most of them are, you know, in our R2, what we're labeling as R2, the lots are rarely wider than 30 feet. And in the R1, where your minimum lot size, as we're proposing, is 6,500 square feet, they are usually 35 feet instead. So your width of your lot helps define what your setbacks, what are reasonable setbacks, as well as, I said before, what's already built up in those neighborhoods, because we are trying to match the existing built environment, the zoning to the existing built environment, so that houses that already exist or properties that already exist are no longer non-conforming because we downzone them.
Okay, I'm not really sure I understand that. When I walk around East Evanston and see these fine, beautiful homes, I have a friend who lives a home on a lake. I know the R1 districts can vary. They actually have really nice lot sizes. So I have to really question your ideas about that. Number 2, I don't know why you would make our area more dense. If you kept it at 2.5 stories, maybe you want to make 3 flats, but you're talking substantial differences. So I have a flat top roof. My hope, because the climate is getting warmer, is I'd put solar panels on it and try to install some reasonable kind of AC in the units instead of the windows units that we use. There's no way I'm going to do that if I'm going to have buildings blocking my light, and you're set that up perfectly to have that happen. So can you explain why you think that's a good idea?
You're close to, that's the zoning is affected by the centers and corridors, because that's, I think, what is happening. I don't have the zoning map in front of me, but please send in the specifics. And if Councilmember Revelle forwarded it to me, it may be still sitting in my inbox. I was in meetings most of the afternoon, so we were trying to catch everything, but if I missed it, I apologize, and we will get back to you on it.
Well, that's fine, but the answer to me is we are in a mixed, diverse block, and you are choosing to make it very dense. We are on a narrow street. When there are people parking on either side of our street today, it's one way and someone's going to back up when you get crowds, which we will be having because of Ryan Field. So my question is, why are you saying, oh, you were an R4 here, we're going to make you R3, we're going to add 15 more stories onto houses and put your minimum setback at 3 feet? That doesn't make sense to me. If it's if the zoning, the standard zoning is 5-foot minimum, it should apply to all residential areas. So I'm objecting to that,
Okay.
because to me, all it says is developers can come in, they can build the max, and they can charge the most money. And I have shadows over my house now, and it's not as a livable neighborhood like we have today. So I really think you need to look at why you determine in a broad swath to put this R3, this 3-foot minimum setback on all the residential districts with the exception of R1. And if you are at all considering livability of the inhabitants in what I am now saying is on my block is diverse or not, because it seems to me it's just an algorithm you've used. Oh, you were this, okay, you're that, and you have to have this. So that's the first question. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, Sonia, we've got a lot of people with hands raised. Can you come back towards the end, or if we don't get to your question, send it directly to Sarah or to me?
Okay, because I just want to comment, Eleanor. The
Yeah.
other one, we do live near a commercial district. If you're going to build density on our street, it will impact the businesses right across the alley from me, which I think you might be familiar with the discussion we had last night.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay, great. So next, I don't have a name for you, Mr. iPad. And you're muted.
I apologize. It shows up as iPad. My name is Joe Caprilli. One quick question. I was curious why our schools, District 35 or Evanston Township, is not mentioned in the comprehensive plan, is not shown on the land use map, and is not shown on the zoning map. And in fact, and I know the zoning map is draft, if you look at the areas of school on the zoning map, they show up as R1. Is that an oversight? Is that to be corrected?
No, it's typical that a school is kind of a school can be in residential zoning because it's a school, but it normally is kept at the same zoning as the district it's in, because you're not going to have a plethora of schools cropping up. It's just there to serve as part of the community. That's why it is not zoned differently, because it clearly isn't a single family home.
But it's not addressed in the comprehensive plan. There's a lot of discussion about wanting families to move to Evanston. And one of the key reasons families move to Evanston is to utilize the schools. And on the zoning map, given where District 65 is and the discussion about bankruptcy and closure of schools, those schools really could take on a different life and I disagree with you. I think that showing them as R1 is inappropriate.
What do you think they should be shown as?
They should have a separate district. And the zoning map, Evanston Township is highlighted in the same way University is, but the
Yeah.
District 35 schools are not shown.
Well, the District 202 is a much larger area, for one thing. But one of the things that, so I don't know, when you're saying that schools may close, are you thinking that what would happen to those buildings? Is that one of the things that you were considering? And
It's a potential.
okay, well, we have something that can address that. And it is an adaptive reuse of existing buildings that can be then done. That is a specific other part of our code that allows different development of an existing structure to a different use, to maintain the building and take advantage of it. So that,
Sarah, in all respect, I think you're dancing around the question. I don't understand on the zoning map why the schools aren't shown and in some way designated as schools with appropriate open space.
well, we can designate them, I suppose, but I do want to point out that we had the Foster Field designated as open space, and it is now being built as a school. So, I mean, the school districts are going to do what they need to with their schools, with their land and their properties. So apart from our zoning, we also don't, frankly, control when they are building a building. We don't handle the review or any of the approvals of that. That's done by the state. There's a real difference in how educational organizations are treated.
Oh, okay, well, let's move on to Rob Mark.
Hi there. I have been following this grand plan that the city's been involved in, but I have to admit, I was not aware of this rezoning issue until just recently. But I'm curious, because I live in Northwest Evanston and, near Central Street, and I'm trying to imagine how I would react if the city suddenly told the people on either side of me that, sure, when you sell your house, you can sell it to somebody that wants to put up a 4-story building and all that. I'd be a little concerned about that because it was not in existence when we bought the home. I mean, if somebody had told me that, hey, there's a chance the city might look at this differently someday, maybe I'd say, well, that was my fault then for not understanding that. But I'm just curious, when you say you've talked to 3,000 people, I'm curious how many of them live in homes that are currently R1, like ours is, and ask them, how would you feel if this new zoning ordinance came to be and allowed builders to buy properties on various sides of you and put up 3 or 4-story buildings? My guess is that if you really want to pass this, I'm not particularly keen on it, but you might want to ask those people that live in those houses that are R1 right now and see how they feel. Simply saying that you've kind of talked to a good share of people from the diverse aspects of Evanston, it probably isn't going to cut it for that particular issue. So again, I'm just curious, have you guys specifically addressed that question to people that live in homes that are R1 right now? Sorry, long question, long way to get to a short question, but
I can tell you that we find that many people don't want to see change where they live, and that's pretty normal.
but that's not what I asked.
So I'll jump in. That very specific question, no, was not asked. We didn't go to the meetings and say and ask, let's say you have your home, how would you feel about however many stories being built next to you? And largely because at the point that we were going out into the community, we didn't have these proposed zoning changes in mind at the time. So it was really getting an idea of how people feel about where they currently live, what they would like to see, what they would be open to seeing, but in a broader sense. So when we were, again, when we were going out, we didn't have proposed zoning changes to present to people to say, what do you think about this? So, and again, to Sarah's point, we did hear a wide variety of responses from people who, yes, live in single family homes, who live in maybe existing apartment buildings, condo buildings of varying sizes. And it varied. There are people who want to absolutely keep the R1 zoning. There are people who were open to having multi-unit buildings within their neighborhood. There are people who were open to it with caveats. So there are, again, a wide range of responses to the questions that
Okay,
were.
if I can just add something to that, I understand what you're saying about a wide range of responses, but that, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but it doesn't actually answer my question about, have you specifically spoken to people in R1 homes and asked them that question? And now
Yeah.
maybe in the group, I know, I'm sorry, you did say you hadn't, but I'm saying that, saying we've had a wide range of opinions. Well, that's true, but I guarantee, well, not guarantee you, I'm sorry. I'm thinking seriously that if you asked people who lived in those R1 homes how they would feel about this rezoning, allowing what you've all been talking about tonight, you might get some pretty lopsided feedback there of people saying, I don't think that's something I'm real keen on. But again, I'm not sure how the city's going to make the decision about whether this zoning approval, whether the zoning change is approved or not.
Okay. Thank you. Lori Keenan next.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of thoughts. First of all, it's a little, I think the 3%, while the city staff seem to want to celebrate that number, that it's higher than 2% in other communities, this is Evanston, and 3% is an abysmal turnout. For instance, when we did the Harley Clark referendum, we got 80% approval in every ward and every precinct in the city. Very few people I've spoken to have any idea that this is even happening. Eleanor, you're supposed to be representing your constituents, yet it feels like you're set to vote in favor of this and seem to support rushing the process so that you'll have a vote. And that seems, I mean, as an elected official, you should represent the voices of your constituents. And I have a feeling that this R1 zoning is going to severely impact the residents in the 7th Ward. And anyone I've spoken to about it has opposed it. So, and I know for a fact that developers are contacting residents now to purchase their properties. A couple in my neighborhood who own a 2-flat on a corner lot have already been contacted by developers. And it's insulting to me as a taxpaying resident that at the land use committee meetings, real estate agents who are not even residents, but they live in Chicago, and real estate agents and others who are not residents are even able to speak or have an opinion on this. Why is that so? And I feel as someone who ran against Daniel Biss in the last election, that a lot of this language about bold seems to be on everyone's lips, and many city staff talking about this bold plan, which was a lot of Daniel Biss's campaign rhetoric. And this feels like it's being driven not by the community, but by city staff who don't actually live here, who don't send their kids to schools here, who don't pay taxes here. So with respect, Sarah Flax talking about Golden Girls are telling us that people will be using public transportation. There will be fewer cars somehow, that overparked streets will somehow be better for us because people will be driving more slowly. it's all insulting our intelligence. And I think that Rob Mark made an excellent point in that the people being impacted should have a voice and should have a vote. And I think especially in this R1 rezoning issue, let's talk to the people who, bought our homes here, not anticipating that a 4-flat would be going up next door to us. But I get the sense, as I've said for a long time now, that in Evanston, it often feels like decisions are made before meetings are had. And I think that this process feels a lot like that. It just feels a little bit like a sham process, and it's too bad. And I think a lot of people really do care in Evanston, and I think we're being essentially sold a bill of goods and told that, oh, this will happen over time. Well, maybe, but I have a feeling that the developers are already circling. So those are my opinions, my points, and I'm just sort of sorry to see it happening once again.
Okay, I'm just going to chime in a little bit since you asked me directly. I mean, I think the proposal as it currently stands needs some revisions. It's not ready for me yet to say yes, to vote, to approve it. So I'm hoping to see some changes to it that will make it feel better for residents. And obviously I do have to represent 7th Ward residents, but I also, on the city council, we also try to do, beg your pardon? We do also try to do what we think is best for the community as a whole. So I'm not ready to vote yes yet. William Rice.
Hi, how are you? I wrote the question earlier about the 3 unrelated rule, and essentially removing that would allow a group of 6 to 10 college students to live next to any family in Evanston. Peer schools in Durham, Berkeley, California, Ann Arbor have shown sort of lots of disruption, and I've sent Megan several studies that show rent price increases and push families out of rental homes in various communities that have removed this rule or allow large groups of college students. In particular, the fact that a lot of neighborhoods are R1 zoned and allow or don't allow large groups of college students to live there insulates them from the rent price increase in particular. Have you considered changing the 3 unrelated rule to a rule restricting more than 3 unrelated students can't live together? You mentioned it was discriminatory, and that there was other people who, for economic or other reasons, were living together. Could you just restrict it to students, such that it didn't lead to like party houses and sort of like a party row living next to families?
We have been looking at various ways to try to deal with the student issue, and we haven't looked at that particular one. But we'll continue to look at options, and if you have other ideas, please send them in.
Great. Yeah, I mentioned this to Megan, I think in July of this year. So it's been, almost 6 months now. It's just and the draft that you all submitted after I brought this up included the removal of the 3 unrelated rules. So I have brought it up already, and it seems I just want to ensure that I'm not screaming into a void here, and that you're all listening to feedback.
Thank you. We did talk a little bit about some of the other options we're looking at, but we're continuing to consider those, and we can look at more unrelated, but I still think that has some of the same challenges because you're always going to hit a threshold where it's going to not necessarily, it doesn't. And I also want to raise something. Proving relationships is very difficult. People have different last names. I mean, we had a household where It was.
Yeah,
a-
no, I understand that.
Inviting
I'm
people.
specifically saying students, just to preempt your, like, I think living next to a group of college students is very different than living next to any family. And I think, we all understand that. And, I don't think anyone's trying to prevent anyone who's living, who needs to for economic reasons or for their own personal choice to live in a larger or with a larger family. So I think specifically college students is my only concern. And I think to be clear, I think this would gentrify the Fifth Ward where, I don't live, but I think, I've seen this in Allston, Massachusetts in particular, where it was a working class neighborhood. And within 10 years, rents increased 70% and essentially it became a student village. And schools got much worse, and families were pushed out because of the. And I sent in the chat a couple examples, but I think it's worth looking at that case study and understanding that I think you would very quickly gentrify the Fifth Ward of Chicago of Evanston.
Okay, we will look at that. Thank you.
Excellent. And then just 3,000 out of 75,000 is a fairly small sample. And I think when you ask questions about affordability, it's very abstract. Now that you've put out a plan and people respond to it, why not make this like a campaign issue and wait till after the election to vote on the plan? It just feels like this is way more tangible for people to understand exactly what's happening. And I just bought a house recently in Evanston. I would love for it to have been more affordable. And I actually, wouldn't mind if my house decreased in value, but I would care if the environment that I'm raising my children in changed materially. And I think that's what you're proposing versus sort of just changing sort of the price of homes. So I think if everyone could just rewind back to 2019, I think a lot of people would be happy with it. And I think that's what people hear when they hear affordability. But what you're proposing with Evanston, just doing the math on what Mayor Biss has said, essentially 1 out of every 3 R1 homes will become a multiplex over that period. And this is based on going from 250 to 500 units. There's 6,000 R1 homes and 2,500 divided by 6,000 gets you to 40%. So just the math is like, if you look to your left, look to your right, 1 of the 3 of those homes is going to be a multiplex. Why not make this a campaign issue? And Biss has described this as transformational. Like, why doesn't a transformational change require sort of a direct mandate?
Well, City Council at its first meeting in January is going to be discussing the timeline for considering and approving the plan and the zoning code. So we are going to be having a discussion about that in January.
Great. And I guess, would you support, just to be clear, if it is a transformational change, like Mayor Biss has just said, that you would want it to be a campaign type issue and something that happens post the election?
Well, making it a campaign issue without being sure that the candidates are all going to have a chance to really understand all the issues involved here. If we're postponing it after the election, I would say it should be postponed easily at least 6 months, if not longer, so that the new council would really have time to get fully up to speed on all the aspects of it, because the plan is a lot more than just the R1 zoning issue.
Great. So would you support postponing it 6 months to let the new council decide?
I'm certainly open to thinking about that. I don't want to commit at the moment.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Patrick O'Connor.
Hi, am I off mute now? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Picking up off William Rice's thinking, just looking at how transformational this could potentially be, just looking at part of the potential zoning change, because I can't even fathom all of it. But to piggyback off of what he just said, I think it was a little misleading earlier when the presenters mentioned that, well, there's really not much of a difference between what's allowed in R1 right now and what would be allowed. He had it right just now, William did. It's about a 40% increase in the amount of building that you can do on an R1 lot in the proposed zoning. And just to give you an idea what that means, I mean, 40%, we can all look at our lot, we can look at our next door neighbor's lot. Someone earlier mentioned there's about 6,000 or 7,000 R1 lots in Evanston. If each one of those lots were to develop to its full potential, that additional square footage, just the additional square footage, not the existing buildings, just the delta would be about 12 million square feet of building. To put that in perspective, the new football stadium at Northwestern is 700,000 square feet. So that's about 17 of Northwestern football stadiums that we would just be allowing in Evanston. We're just giving away the keys to the kingdom, saying we no longer have control over this anymore, because that's going to be the as of right zoning. So I worry a lot about that, and I think it's somewhat it's really reckless to just give away that amount of control in a community like ours. And the second point I wanted to make, and I'll make it real quick, was to Sarah, who did address my question earlier about the time frame for this process. Sarah, I assume you've done these kind of comp plans and zoning change rewrites before, right?
No, I actually haven't.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you what your personal experience is in terms of duration. But again, the folks I've spoken to and researched put this at about 2.5 to 3 years typical for a comp plan and a zoning rewrite. And I haven't found any professional in the industry who has heard of it being done concurrently.
Okay, Mary Rosinski.
I have a couple questions. I agree with the writers. This transformational is coming from, I think, Mayor Biss, and I don't think there was a big call out from the residents of Evanston that we really want more density. I'm concerned about the fact that we're creating also instability in our real estate market, because as has been referred to, when you purchase a house or a condo or a townhouse, you're selecting your neighborhood, and most people generally try to buy the most they can that they can afford in the area that they want to afford. And now we have to tell them, but I don't know if that house is going to be across the street from you or next to you, because you can go up 4 stories. And these are the sort of insecurities that I think we need to talk about, because we are totally transforming. And when that gets across for people moving in, and you're asking people to invest probably the biggest investment that they have in a place where they don't know if they're going to have a similar neighborhood in 3 years, I think you are underestimating the negative impact you will do. And yes, I don't think this is going to happen overnight by any stretch. I think it's going to be a gradual. I think that investors and builders will go to the least expensive areas, buy those properties, put like they did on Pittner, as we all know. I don't know if you know about, but you know, where the Anton's was, and then those townhouses became $600,000-700,000, and the entire 5th Ward and 2nd Ward then becomes more expensive and affordable for a certain income, right? So then you just keep pushing that west until eventually in Eleanor, you will have someone who's a multi-billionaire who will buy the house next to you and put up a 4-flat. You know, I mean, I think we have to decide why we are doing this. I think a lot of people came to Evanston because they like Evanston, and people buying real estate want security. Investors are more comfortable with risk. So that's my first thing. I looked a lot at the Minnesota plan, and I just am baffled that we are moving so fast on this. It is the classic designing, building, and flying your airplane at the same time. And our people, our residents deserve better than that. I truly think so. I hope we will just push this back. But my biggest concern in Minnesota, they had 75% single family residents, and they had 58 square miles. They had a lot of land and stuff to build with. We have 31% of our property was single family, and a lot of that is 2 flats and townhouses in those R1 districts. So I'm not saying, you know, you can't upgrade, but I think you have to be honest with the fact that we have a lot of multifamily, we have density, and there is nothing in this plan to create affordable housing. And to rely on supply and demand is ludicrous, because we have the best location. We have a great reputation still, and people are going to want to come. So it'll just be the people who are at the lower of the financial that are going to have to leave to be able to stay here. And I think that if we say we want to be diverse and we want affordable housing, then we need to be sincere and say we need a plan. And that has to be spelled out in this. but those are statements. But my last question is, why are we scrapping all the overlay districts? Minnesota has 8 zoning districts and 35 overlaid and districts within those 8 districts, so that they can tailor the character and, aesthetics of the neighborhood to what it is exactly. Why are those being scrapped? Central Street neighbors spent almost, I think it was a year, 2 years, working with the city to develop something that was proportionate in human size. The West End said they've spent about a year or so developing the West End plan. Why are those being scrapped?
Yeah, so Sarah, let's go to the answer, Sarah.
Well, one of the things is the system we had with our complex zoning and multiple overlays is really just unmanageable and does not allow any flexibility. And the different districts that had their own zoning were very, very different. The West Evanston master plan is completely different from the Central Street plan.
Yeah, that's the way it was planned to be, because that's what
Yes.
those people wanted, and those people in the Central Street, and those people in the downtown, and those people in the other areas. Maybe we need people in the city who can can better understand those plans to implement them.
One of the goals that has come out of that, the whole early input and discussion, was getting economically integrated neighborhoods. And that is one of the reasons some of those, you can't address the needs collectively in a city if you continue to have those separately zoned districts that are then apart from what the rest of the zoning is.
Sarah, that makes no sense. I'm sorry, I have to take issue with that. The West Side Plan asked for small buildings up to maybe 2-3 stories, townhouses, a business district like Main Street or Dempster. Central Street isn't that much different than Main Street and, Dempster. I mean, so if you get east of Dempster, east of Chicago Avenue, you have more duplexes and single families. You go west, you have a mixture of single families, duplexes, and some buildings. But we don't have to have everything be the same to be good. And we also have different widths of streets, and we have different heights of existing homes and buildings. And I just feel like you just want to take everything and paint it white. We need color, we need light, we need air, we need diversity and economics and housing and architecture. And I don't think in a city of our size, we're going to become the Stepford Village.
That's an interesting phrase.
Well, that's what it feels like to me. I just, it's like, we're going to all have the same. And it's like Evanston was built on beautiful architecture and its neighborhoods. And what I'm not hearing in this comprehensive plan, I'm clearly upset about this, is because our old comprehensive plan talks so much about our neighborhoods being the building blocks of our city, and that makes a healthy, strong city. And that seems to be missing. I actually like Minnesota's a lot better. They have a plan for, let's develop economics so that more people can afford stuff. Let's have this area over here kind of stay with what it is, and they'll go up a little bit. And I mean, they tweak it to the neighborhood instead of making the neighborhood tweak to some plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we can go back and look at that.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
Can we move on? Kira Kelly next. And we're going to have three more people, and then I think it will be time for us to adjourn. So what happened to Kira?
Must have dropped off.
Well, while we're waiting for Kira to come back, Jeff Smith.
Hi, Eleanor. Thanks.
Hi.
I was happy that the city posted the previous two comprehensive plans or most of the 72 plan is there, along with the 2000 plan. And I'd urge everybody to take a look at that 72 plan and then contrast it with the draft that we've seen so far. The transmittal letter for the 72 plan begins with the sentence, "Years of work are required to produce a comprehensive plan." It draws on many other reports, a vast array of data, carefully defined problems, and analyses of many kinds. And I'm seeing that missing from the ongoing effort. You know, I'm not a fan of everything that came out of the 70s, starting with disco and leisure suits, but you know, we also got the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And what I really like about the 72 plan is the way that there's pros and cons and a thorough history of how we got to what we were doing then, and the reasons why you might not want to do something, or the reasons why you might. The current draft that I'm seeing is far more of an advocacy piece, and I don't feel that there's been sufficient outreach to, in particular, homeowners as a constituency, and asking people why they moved here and why they want to stay. And there's obviously, we have to think about the future, but people who are here are the ones who have made the investment. And I think they're the folks who live here and pay taxes now and have this massive investment now are the primary constituency to which everybody in government has to give respect. And that includes taking a look at where you got to. Also, the data that's in the 72 plan, and we didn't have anywhere near the computing power that we have now. They go back decades, saying for every decade, here's how many units were built, how many were constructed, how many 2 units, how many 3 units, how many single family homes, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing like that in the current plan. I had to issue a FOIA and I got back the answer that we don't have that kind of data. If we don't have that kind of data, this process is totally unmoored. I think in order to really respect the people who live here in Evanston, who've moved to Evanston, who've invested in Evanston, who've given their heart and soul, raised families here, worked on the PTA, coached the Little League and soccer teams, to give all that the respect that it deserves, that this whole thing really needs to be slowed down. I think that 6 months after the election, you need 6 months because you can't expect a new council to do it right away. I think anything before the election would be a rush job. We really need the time to get, it's much more important to get it right than to get it done quick. And I hope, Eleanor, that you'll take a lead in the thoughtfulness that's important to that philosophy.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So Kira Kelly says she.
Yes, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, right. There we go.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, this plan was submitted to the Land Use Commission for review and recommendation with many errors pointed out by the Land Use Commission. There were incorrect maps, conflicting goals. There was missing data on very important, you know, premises that were made. And you know, the planner, some on the commission who are planners and have been on other planning commissions said that typically there's data that shows there's inventory done on what housing we have, what the vacancy rates are, what housing we actually need. And this is unusual to just, based on nothing and no data, just be going after these certain goals. And then also I wanted to say that, sorry, this is a loud background here, that the Land Use Commission is now looking at the zoning plan that reflects every single district in Evanston, really every single plot. And they need to carefully vet this plan. This is the only stop to vet this plan. Yet, because it seems like Mayor Biss's timeline to be finished by the election, they've only been given very few meetings to go through an entire, you know, the rezoning of an entire city. And they have basically said there's no way they can possibly review this carefully. one of the commissioners asked for a consultant themselves because he is so worried that they're not going to adequately go through this. And in fact, the zoning plan they've been given is incomplete. And apparently there's other sections that are still going to be submitted. And it seems that they would need to see the zoning plan in its entirety, because different sections can certainly relate to each other. So basically, this is a 20-year plan. It's really in the best interest of Evanston that this zoning be carefully vetted and reviewed. And it's clear that we need more time. And, it just seems, which is more important, the election schedule, this sort of arbitrary timeline, this breakneck timeframe where we're getting sort of slapdash, really what seemed like working drafts. And these seem like working meetings versus like they're actually public hearings, legal public hearings where they're being asked to review plans and give recommendations. And that goes into a next question is, how can this feedback we're providing today possibly be meaningful if the plan and zoning has already been submitted to the Land Use Commission and they are being asked to give a recommendation, and we're kind of in the middle of that, even though they thankfully paused that for a couple weeks. So I'd like to have the answer to that question. And then also, please, Evanston is just too special of a community for such a kind of a process like what we've had, and just kind of drafts of plans. This really needs to be much more thoroughly gone through. I've seen more meetings on one alley than this will be, for our comprehensive plan and zoning. So I ask you to please give us the time we deserve. My last question is, I'm wondering what happened to the 2 consultants that we hired and wrote these plans. Typically the consultants present their own plan, but in this case, it seems like the city staff is sort of finishing up the process here, and then they're presenting. And this, I'm sorry, but that was a 5-minute overview of something so important. So that's it. Thank you.
So Sarah, could you respond briefly to some of Kara's comments?
This particular meeting is a combined ward meeting. This is not a public hearing. So, we're responding to the request, to what our 2 council members asked us to provide, at least as we understood it. The schedule is something that was directed that we got in our direction from city council at approval of the contract for this plan. And so we already said we will follow the direction of council on any changes to that schedule.
I have a question. Did city council vote on this? I keep hearing like, oh, this is the direction of council, but I don't remember any votes to that effect.
Well, I'm sure we voted on the contract for the consultants, but what was that, Sarah?
The timeline was
was part of that. Okay.
Yes, it was.
I will say, that was, so what month was that? That was March.
It was July. I have a note here.
Anyway.
Seems like a long time ago to me, frankly.
Right, yeah. But anyway, it was certainly so long ago. And what was that?
It was July of 2023.
Right, okay, so a year and a half ago. I don't think any of us on the council had a vision of how complex this whole process would be. And so, whether if we had known, would we have set that timeline? I don't know. So I think that's why we're discussing the timeline in January.
Well, I appreciate that.
Ravel, if I could add,
yes,
specifically to some of Ms. Kelly's questions or comments. So you are correct that the Land Use Commission has gotten the portions of the zoning code that have been released so far. And part of the reasoning for them delaying their review was so that they could have a complete code to look at. So the remaining portions of the code will be released so that they'll have everything to look at, because they did point out that there were portions of what they were looking at that pointed to sections that had not yet been released. So the intention for them delaying it would be for them to have a complete document Also, we are still in the process where we can update these documents. So this is not something that is a final thing that will be provided to council for them to vote on with its imperfections and lack of data, et cetera. There'll be an opportunity for us to go back and take the feedback that we've gotten, written comments, the survey that's been put out, make those changes, provide some possible alternatives, if that's something that is desired, and then have that incorporated. And even I think once we have a final vote on the plan, if it were to be approved, there'd still probably be an opportunity to do some last minute tweaks and do things that are as small as like copy editing to make sure that the wording flows. So something as small as that, along with the larger changes that we are hearing are needed, and that we do now have some time to actually incorporate. So that speaks to that particular
if
delay for that.
the land use commission, they're the experts, and if they're going through a plan and making specific comments or changes, are we really going to give that? Are they going to get the sort of the next, like if the public, if you sort of modify it based on what you've heard, are you going to resubmit that to the land use commission to look at again? Or who's the ultimate like quality control of, it seems like this is one giant like Google Doc, and are people chiming in on this doc? And then who ultimately is going to, do the quality control? Are they going to be people who are qualified to do so? And then also, I'm wondering why there wasn't.
Kira.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. So
I'll let you go.
Megan can respond to that, and then we're going to move on to Connie Porteous.
So we do intend to have some updates and alternatives for the Land Use Commission to look at, especially with regards to the zoning code, and when we have that additional portion of that code released. We are going to be working on making some updates to the comprehensive plan as well. However, we will probably be moving things forward in such a way where we'll have some additional alternatives, some suggested changes that the council can look at, and they can decide what to incorporate.
Okay, great. Connie Porteous, you've had your hand up a long time. Are you unmuted? There we go.
I've sat through a lot of the Land Use Commission. I tried to keep it to simple thoughts, which I don't always have. I do think it has to be slowed down. The area that I lived in, I moved into 50 years ago. And the house that I live in is part of preservation. It's over 149 years old. Not me, but the house. But part of the process in all of this is to consider, yes, affordable housing is important. I'm a part of that. But at the same time, the character of a neighborhood can't have, as someone has already pointed out, a formula housing. I think that when you think of developers, and when somebody takes my house down at some point, it should fit the neighborhood of what's already been here. Bleets built houses on Deitch's farm years ago, and each house had a different formula, but looked the same. And they are single family housing. And I don't think that people here are against trying to find something that fits the neighborhood, but also take into consideration the traffic pattern of 3 streets. And I got lost getting here years ago. Crawford, Grosse Pointe Road, and Central Street are high traffic streets. And you start putting in a huge 4-flat housing here, will create so much more traffic that it's not even the parking issue, it's the traffic. And so I am surely for the council, the Land Use Commission slowing down, as I have heard they've agreed to, but the character of each area of Evanston, which is why we all chose different places, and want the diversity and the equity that's built into my DNA anyway. But it has to be done without formulas that are going to be spread over a whole area to be the same. And as I've driven through Evanston the last few weeks, looking at where there's a two flat house and single family housing, they fit because time has allowed choices to be made. It shouldn't be just, I got a developer, they can build a 4 flat in this particular spot. I just really can't say enough to say that it just has to take time. And when we've rushed things in Evanston, we all know what's happened. Things end up not well. So I finish with that.
Okay, thank you. And we really do need to adjourn, but Shelley, I think you've had your hand up a while.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm in the
And
6th
then we're
ward. I
gonna,
have a
you're the
question.
last one, right? Yeah, go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
in the 6th ward. I have a question for Tom Suffredin.
Okay.
I was wondering what you've heard from constituents in the 6th ward about the zoning changes, the R1 zoning changes.
Well, I don't know what the exact breakdown of this meeting is, but I think it's 50% 6th ward people is probably correct. I mean, I've heard generally like what this meeting is tracking, a lot more concerns. There are people who are outright opposed. There are people who have concerns about the timeline in particular. That's one of the reasons why, I asked that we talk about this in our first meeting in January. And then there are people who are in favor of this concept. I mean, we're at a part of this where feedback is still able to be incorporated. I think it feels like we're later than we are based on the timeline that several council members have proposed. But what I've heard from my constituents mostly is either they're opposed or they want this slowed down, but I don't want to discount the number of people who are in favor of an expansion of multifamily buildings. It all comes down to the details. One of the things, and I think Megan may have touched on it, there'll be some improvements. My understanding is there'll be a lot level detail on the map that should come out sometime around December 20th. There are a lot of questions related to the format and content of the draft that I think can be solved. But generally what I've heard and what's being said in this meeting match up pretty well.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
okay.
Shelley.
So it's a little bit after 9 o'clock, which is a half an hour past our scheduled end time. So I think we're going to wrap it up now. I would encourage all of you to continue to send your questions, comments, suggestions, ways that you think improvements you'd like to see, if there are any. Send those to Tom and to me and to staff. This is still a work in progress in my mind, and still a lot of room for changes and I hope improvements. So I thank you all for very much. So there's going to be a recording is made, as you know, and it'll be available. Well, I guess we'll send out that information to our ward members. It's probably, and maybe there'll be a place for it to be posted on the city website.
Yeah,
So
probably, I'm guessing probably on either one or both of your ward pages on the city's website. Also, I do want to mention that we will have an interactive map be released. So if you have kind of broader general questions about your particular zoning, it'll be more interactive, easier to read than the static maps that are currently out. So you'd be able to zoom in and compare your current zoning with the proposed zoning and have a better idea of what would be going on surrounding your property. So that will be released probably tomorrow.
Okay, that'll be good.
Can I just ask, are all the questions on the site somewhere? I didn't see it easily, but I could have missed it. Like when we're sending questions, I never know if they're actually received. I sent a couple to the just general thing on the city website.
Well, I mean, yeah, Megan, could you describe what happens to the input that you get?
So the general input that we get, we are compiling that. So it will pretty much be in a spreadsheet of sorts. So we try to compartmentalize what particular aspect of the plan they are referencing. So if you have a comment about parks and open space and amenities, we'll have that in a spreadsheet, and then we'll like maybe check off where that actually falls. That's how we're actually trying to track things that we receive. If we get general questions, we try to just respond to those. And apologies if it's taking a little bit longer as we are going through getting the drafts and everything together, but we are trying to compile everything and then going back through and making sure that we can address the comments and suggestions that are made so we can make changes or provide some alternatives for Land Use Commission and Council to review.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to Megan and to Sarah and to Steve, if he's still there. I can't see him. There you go. Okay. And Allison, who was here earlier. So thank you all very much for being with us this evening, and I'm sure we will see you again soon.
Thank you all for your input in the discussion. This is one of the things we're seeking. Thanks so much.
Well.
Bye-bye.
Good night.